but transmission of data along long neurons is almost at the speed of light.
Okay.
And so that's why the mind can go the way that it is. I mean, we can do things very quickly within the mind. The reaction is not the reaction of what's going on in the mind, but rather it's the bodily responses where the body has to catch up to what the mind has already done. This is what we refer to as response or reaction time. Now, what this means is that the mind is so fast that consciousness itself is confused to be continuous, where in fact it's not. It stops and starts and stops and starts and stops and starts, depending upon which objects we're concentrating on. For instance, if we see an object, then that's sight, and that's a kind of consciousness when we're paying attention to what we're looking at. Same thing with hearing or thought or feelings of the body in various places. And so it all gets really complicated as to where consciousness is going. But what we have the idea is that it's always just there moving around rather than no, it's on, here it's on, here it's on, there it's on. This is the way that it operates. It goes in an on-off fashion, but we have the feeling or the idea that it's a consciousness that's always there moving around. This is another way of giving a sense of self. It's very much like a movie. You know, a movie has, at least film producers, with television, they run 30 frames a second. With television, with film, it normally runs at 24 frames a second. But now that we've gone digital, we can run any frame rate we want. But in the old days, they ran at 24 frames a second. Now, when that movie is played, people think that it's a continuous stream. But my dad had projector. I would go to work with him sometimes. He had this huge arc projector. You know what an arc light is? Like in World War II, they had the big arc lights, which is a carbon rod that's going towards something that's a worm gear feed to keep it within distance so that the electric charge can jump across it, making an arc. That's very brilliant. It's the same kind of thing that's in arc welding.
Okay.
All right. And that arc is always on. But when that frame is shown through the arc, it gives an image on the screen. But on front of it, also a motor-driven thing, is a wheel that's like the fan blade of a fan that's designed to blow air, except that it's designed so that you can either have one that's half black and half white and run it at twice the speed. Normally they have it running at a speed so that you'll have two black and two white on opposite corners, so that half the time that arc light does not shine on the screen. This gives that time in that projector to move that to the next frame. That's what gives the clicking quality to the videos.
Right.
Okay, and you can hear that clicking. It's a very low frequency clicking that goes on, but when the mind or the eyes body combination sees the screen, it looks like that it's a continuous flow.
Okay.
Our consciousness is the same way until we really start paying attention and start looking at it. And then we begin to see, oh, no, it is not on all the time. It is on, off, and on, off, and on, off. Also, this gives rise to the idea that some people have a concept that the universe goes on and off and on and off and on and off like that, but that nobody's ever aware of it because we don't know when it's off. Not really actually localizing that back to themselves if that's what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
There's also the idea of the matrix, where we're just a computer program. But what happens if the computer crashes? Well, nobody knows. And then they reboot and they start it up again, and everybody's right back exactly where they were when the crash happened. And so nobody knows that we're only a simulation. But this is the concept of consciousness, and with that consciousness is wrapped in the concept of self, because we think that there's a self there all the time, rather than the fact that the self only arises on certain occasions. That in fact, consciousness arises far more often than self does, because self is associated with clinging. That if we're not clinging to anything, there's no sense of self. It's only when we're actually wanting something, wanting to get rid of something or whatever. And in fact, it's only when there's a self to suffer. When there's no suffering, there's no self to suffer. Suffering always has to do with being a self. And that this is where these hindrances are. They give us a sense of self, but there's real no self there. Through investigation, we'll begin to see how this self arises, as well as how consciousness arises, because they're interrelated, but not directly. Between them is feeling,
Right.
which also arises and passes away. Everything is temporary, and all of this stuff is mixed in there, going at a pretty rapid speed. So basically, what we need to do is we need to start paying attention to the distinction between when the mind is in hindrance and when the mind is free from hindrance. This is your first investigation, is to know if there's a hindrance there, what hindrance it is. This is why we practice mindfulness of the body, to bring the mind to the body and bring it into the body, first through the body, then through, well, through the feelings and through the mind and through the mind's objects. But we're beginning to do an investigation.
Right.
The next quality is that in fact, I would go so far as to say it has to do with culture. I see the Western culture as more unhappy than Asian culture. I at one time thought that that had to do with the fact that these are Buddhist people, and they, part of their religion is to teach them to be happy. But on a deeper investigation, I see that no, that's never really taught. And the reason for it is because it's not needed to be taught, because the people here are naturally happy. That's
Right.
not the case with Westerners. We need from our Westerners, because we're the way that we were potty trained, and the way that our mommies handled us, and a whole group of things is designed around taking joy away from a child. We send our
Okay.
children to school. First, we sent them to school at age 6. We've robbed them of their joy at age 6 and said, no, don't be happy, don't play. You sit here and you concentrate and you focus on that. And so then those same students who went to that first grade, when they come to meditation, they do exactly that. When in fact, we're inviting you to sit down and have a party.
Yeah.
And play and investigate, and instead we make hard work out of it. But that's not the only thing. What happens then is that in our modern times, we take the kids even younger and younger and younger and take their joy away from them and give them work to do. Even down to the age of 3, a lot of parents will be very smug and very proud of themselves. Oh, my 3-year-old can read. Lady, you're destroying that child. The question is not how whether he can read or not. The question is whether he's going to have a happy life or not.
What age do they start school in Thailand?
Pardon?
What age do they start school in Thailand?
I think that they have a kind of a Western modern English system right down to the school uniforms. I think that they've adopted quite a lot of stuff from England, and I would say that that has a lot to do with it.
Right.
Also, the international schools here will either be on a British or an American model, But there's only one of them that I know of that has any American model to it, and that's because of the way that the school was set up. That most of the smaller English language international schools here also use the English model
Yeah.
for their teaching, even when they're teaching it bilingual.
Okay.
But there's a they always have a good recess. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be making changes to the body, changes to the feelings, changes to the mind in the way that the mind operates, or the states of mind, and also we're going to work with the contents of the mind. And we're going to be doing them all basically at the same time. But what many people confuse or get wrong is they think that because um, part 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Anapanasati, that has to do with the body, has to be completed before we do any of the other steps. So they take it
Yeah.
as you have to do perfectly or purification of the body before you even start purification of the feelings. And that you have to finish purification of the feelings before you even start purification of the mind, etc., like that. And in fact, basically, no, it's all of them at the same time, but right in the beginning, we need to start immediately. The first thing is the body.
Right.
But so with the Westerner, I would say that the second thing to do would be joy, which is a the mind itself. Actually, it's step 10, as you'll recall, because
Gladdening
you've
the mind. Yeah.
memorized these, right? What's step 9? Test time.
Experiencing mind.
Exactly. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
that's exactly right. What is step 11?
You didn't give it to me last time.
Concentration. You're supposed to dig that out of the sutta. And as you're digging, you will also notice that each of these 16 steps still has built within it, intentionally by the Buddha to make sure that people didn't misunderstand, that this is while mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out. At no time do we lose mindfulness of breathing.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a very important point, especially when people confuse this with jhana practice, because within the jhana practice, as Bhikkhu Buddhadasa rightly pointed out, as we're losing sensations of the body, as we're going into fourth jhana, breathing has to be so refined that it is undetectable.
Yeah.
And that people can go into that state and actually be buried. There's a did I tell you the story about this is well documented that a guy, a yogi, was back in, I think, 1880s, was buried in India in this ceremony. For he's going to be underground for 7 days or something like that, which was a remarkable thing to be buried alive. But war broke out during that time, that the British came in and invaded the place, and everybody scattered. By the time they got back to the place, the British were already in charge. They had to get permission to get the British to let them dig this hole to get this guy out. Three
Yeah.
or more months later, this guy comes out of this hole after being buried alive. Now that's subtle breathing. That's real subtle
Yeah.
breathing.
I think one of the Buddha's disciples, I think he went into samadhi, right, and said he wasn't going to come out of the samadhi until the what is it? Until one of the saviors comes back or something like that. Or, but they found some Indian bodies or something like that somewhere in India that were in the full up. Well, they were cross-legged, but they were like 2,000 years old or something
Oh
like that?
yeah, dying in the fourth jhana is the best way to go. So they say. I haven't tried
Yeah.
it myself recently.
But the body will only last up until your minerals are gone from the body, and your body will waste away over a couple of months, right? Because you're not getting food and water.
Right. It's also a very interesting question about what is death.
Yeah.
What is death? Especially in this situation, to where how far can this guy go before he's revived and be able to survive afterwards?
Yeah.
Um, it really does call into question what is death. You know, back in the 1800s in the United States, they were really concerned to the point that they were putting bells and things in coffins so that people could ring a bell in case they got buried alive.
Yeah, it has happened before where people have woken up in the morgue.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why they have many laws in the United States about embalming. They want people embalmed quickly because that's going to guarantee that you're dead.
Yeah.
So, not breathing
What
used
is
to,
the heart? What is the heart rate in fourth jhana?
it's well, it's can be down to the point of indistinguishable.
Mm.
That it probably is something that's not too far reduced. I mean, it wouldn't be below 30, but it would
So,
be a different kind of blood flow. But it would
so
be
you
some blood flow.
you'd want to be well wrapped up if you're going into fourth jhana, right? Because your body would get cold.
Well, uh, let's not get into some Tibetan practices I know about.
Breath of fire or
Yeah, to bring the fire,
breath of
because
fire.
because that takes energy. I mean, we live in a physical world that's defined by the both Newtonian and Einsteinian physics, and there's only so much energy there. There's no way that a person who's practicing jhana is going to magically grabbing energy out of the soil that he's sitting in, especially if that soil is cold. That's going to
Yeah.
deplete energy. And so if he's doing a fire meditation, he won't be able to do it long.
Yeah.
Might be
Yeah.
able to keep himself warm overnight, but he might not last the 3 months that this dude in India was able to do. So everything is relative at that deep level. But this is not what we're practicing for.
Exactly. Yeah.
These are just sort of the outer bounds, or if you want to look at it that way, the Donald Trump practices that some of the Indians have been doing over the centuries,
Yeah.
which you know is kind of surprising in the sense of just how far people can push the human body. It's just unbelievable how uh, some of these places that people can go. And as I say that, just that way, I'm also reminded that this is exactly one of the incomprehensibles that the Buddha talks about. Is that we don't know where, or what the limits are to
Right.
human capabilities, and that this is an imponderable. We shouldn't bother to try to figure out exactly what this is. It's more so that if that's what you want to do, then go for it. But other than that, don't spend much time on trying to dream it out.
Yeah.
So, uh, getting away then from the jhanas and back into the practice where the Buddha is looking for, what we're in fact going to be doing is more of a taking out the garbage. And that the garbage that we're going to be taking out are the kinds of mental states that cause us suffering. We're going to be taking out the kinds of thoughts that cause us mental suffering. We're going to remove the kind of um, feelings at the emotional level and also at the bodily level that cause us suffering. And we're also then going to relax the body in the sense that we become not completely impervious to pain, but that pain doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
Little children, you've got the kids there. They cry when they have physical pain. That part of maturing has to do with being able to handle the little bumps and scrapes of life. Enlightenment is really mature so that we can handle those things easily.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what we have is we wind up both with a strong mind, but also with a kind of a strong body that's strong through relaxation or tranquilizing. That the body doesn't react to pain the way that it used to react to pain. The things that used to hurt don't hurt anymore. Even to the point of because it was quite surprising. A couple 3 years ago, the stand on a motorbike. When I was moving the stand on the motorbike, I did it in such a way that it ripped the big toenail in half. So that it was a
Right.
big gaping thing, bleeding and all of that kind of stuff. It kind of stunned at that moment, and I noticed it. But later, it never wound up getting to the point of actually ever hurting. It was sensational, but it wasn't painful. Never, and I was actually kind of surprised at that was one thing that I would expect would be quite painful, but it wound up not being so.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do with Goenka meditations have to do with this tranquilizing of the body through the body scanning and whatnot like that, but it's done way too early. That this is
Okay.
not the right sequence of events to take people, but the way he does it is like he only knows about the first four steps of Anapanasati, so that's what he teaches, without the fact that he's actually got to teach all of the Satipatthana within the context of, let us say, a progression.
Okay.
And so what we wind up with is a multi-layered system of Anapanasati with, let us say it like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so that with each of the four, the first two are introductory things, and then the second two, number 3 and 4 of each of the Satipatthana, is things that we wind up with. So as we wind up with relinquishment and succession at one level in the Dhammanupassana, at the Kayanupassana level, we wind up with experiencing the whole body and tranquilizing the whole body. Okay. And also at the mental level, at the end is when we finally wind up with the freedom of the mind. Okay, as well as at the feeling level, experiencing how the mind and the feelings are interrelated or interact with each other. Now, with the development, what we're doing is with the mental part, we're substituting the hindrances with the factors of enlightenment. Even with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, that in fact, if this may be the time to introduce, and it's really late in the game because most teachers introduce the Four Noble Truths as the very first thing that they're taught in Buddhism. If you'll notice, I haven't talked to you about it at all until now. To where
Right.
the Four Noble Truths have to do with the recognition that there is suffering, the recognition of the causes of suffering, the recognition of what it's like to not be suffering, and then the path that leads to the end of suffering. Okay, it's at this point now that we're beginning to understand what it's like to not be suffering, to be free from suffering, because we're free from hindrances of the mind.
Right.
Okay, we're also free from mental states that cause these hindrances of the mind, and that we're also free from the feelings that cause the mind to be in states. So what we're looking at is that through the body we have feelings, and we wind up feeling bad about things, and it's those ignorant bad feelings and ignorant neutral feelings and even ignorant uh, good feelings that wind up being the pollution that needs to be cleared out, as well as. And so what we do is that I guess it would be like eating our way down through a layer cake, that we start with the contents of the mind. We wind up seeing that we've got mental things that we have to deal with at a little deeper level, and then we wind up dealing down at the feeling level. And by
Right.
doing all of that, we wind up also relaxing the body. Okay. So we have this bottom up or top down way of looking at it. That's why they're in the order of uh, body, feeling, mind, and objects, which is precisely also the way that it should be of earth, water, air, and fire. Though for some reason in our culture we've gotten fire and air mixed around so that we normally list fire and then air, where in fact the right way of doing it is earth, water, air, and fire.
Okay.
Okay, so um, within the context of the mind, what we need to start doing is adding joy. As I was saying, the Asians don't um, emphasize it so much, but Bhikkhu Buddhadasa does. And he was especially that way with making sure that I understood that you have to do step 10 right away and in the beginning, that it cannot be put off. That in fact, the biggest problem with meditators isn't that they quit because they, through correct practice, wind up being in a morass. Many people will, when they begin to see what problems they've got, they get real depressed. Other groups that have trouble would be like people who have been military people who have killed people, have had their buddies shot and killed, or had their head blown off beside them. And when these guys go into meditation, they can't hardly stand it because it's a jungle in there. I mean, a real jungle. And so the easiest way for them to deal with it is by getting away from it. Okay, that hiding in alcohol is a much easier way to deal with these problems.
Right.
Luckily, you're not exactly in that particular situation, but it might feel that way sometimes. And this is the reason why joy is such an essential ingredient, is to always, when by the time the hindrance is arising, it's almost too late,
Right.
because it
The
still
only
came out of feeling through the mind into the mind's objects.
the only way I could see that to try and bring up the joy when meditating would be to enjoy the breath. You know, be contented with the sensations of the breath would make one happy.
You've got a how to say it. You've got a joy mill right beside you right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Start being like her. Stop being an
Yeah.
adult and be like her for a while.
So you mean like just a sense of well-being or happy
A
with what you
happy,
have?
curious curiosity. That's one of the things that drives childhood. It should also be that which drives your meditation, is
Right.
curiosity. Normally what we have instead of curiosity is we have doubt, we have confusion. Turn that confusion into curiosity with joy. Confusion plus joy equals curiosity. That's a little mathematical formula for you to remember.
Right.
And it's a cure for doubt, because you're turning your doubt from a hindrance into curiosity by adding
Right.
joy to it. Also, the way of handling the hindrances. In fact, joy, you add joy to every aspect of your meditation. I think, in fact, recently I sent you an email that had to do about how to manage the hindrances with each one of them. Like, for instance, uh, boredom and sleepiness, that we counter that with effort or energy.
Energy, yeah.
But that energy, the source of that energy, is again joy.
Right.
So each one of them, when the hindrances arise, the time to build joy is right then. As soon as you recognize, you can say, "Ah, I caught you." I'm not going to suffer now because I can see this stuff as it arises in the mind. Okay, and that's the way
Yeah.
to build the joy. All right. Also, the body begins to feel good because your mind is being cleared out. You're removing the hindrances and substituting it for the seven factors of enlightenment and other wholesome thoughts. And also, you're using the thinking mind to actually investigate the mind. You're using the thought process to investigate the body. You're beginning to also notice where feelings are in the body. For instance, for
Yeah.
most people, anxiety is right there in the chest. It's a really interesting thing that primitive societies, and in fact, all of our languages, have to do with feelings and heart being somehow separate from thinking and mind. You see that especially with religious people, that they always
Right.
bring it back to a heart, and we're not talking about the thumper, the physical heart organ that pumps blood, but we are talking about that central location where the heart is located.
Yeah.
Around that, the chest chakra is a source of a lot of sensation. And oftentimes, rather than understanding that it's that sensation that we don't like, that it's the object that is associated with that sensation, normally on the outside. Okay, here's an example of that. If you hear a clap of thunder or a gunshot or something like that, many people will have a startle reaction.
Yeah.
People who are mindful don't have startle reactions. They'll hear exactly the same thing, but the startle inside doesn't happen. They remain calm.
Yeah.
And in fact, we wonder, why is everybody so upset?
It's also, if you're conditioned to react like that, if you're from a tropical country where you have lots of thunder and lightning, you're not going to react in it the same way as somebody that doesn't have thunder and lightning. But also, it's true what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also just any noise. I mean, not just thunder and lightning, but
Yeah.
gunshot, backfires of automobiles. Somebody drops a book on the floor. Somebody falls down. A
Yeah.
waitress
Yeah.
drops all of his china on the floor. Whatever a noise, but there's this startle reaction is based upon fear, but it comes out of feeling.
Yeah.
And then everybody, the next thing that happens in the mind is confusion. What was that? And everybody starts then using their eyes to look around to try to figure out what it was, if they haven't already figured it out in their mind. But figuring
Yeah.
out what that noise was is the first priority after we hear it. And the reason for that is because we don't like how we feel. And so we have
Yeah.
sort of a sound feeling, but it's a feeling that's in the body. For some people, it's such a feeling that in fact, the body jerks. The startle
Yeah.
reaction is, in fact, a reaction that the body has. Okay, so this is something that we need to start watching: is how does the body feel? This is where we talk about experiencing the body, but we're talking about experiencing the body in this way, in the sense of feeling,
Right.
with the understanding and the idea that the feeling that we're going to have is a feeling that feels really good, rapture, pleasure.
Yeah.
Step 5 and 6. In fact, you could go so far as to say that 6 should precede 5. That the feelings of pleasure will come simply by being free from the hindrances.
5 is development of rapture. What is 6?
Well, rapture, remember, is specifically bodily oriented. And it has to do with the feelings on the, for instance, a small amount of rapture will be the hair on the arms stands up, the hair on the back of the neck stands up, cold chills go through the body. This is the kind of things that will happen in the first jhana.
Right.
But during the development of the first jhana, the Buddha gives the um, analogy of bath powder, and that we can use the analogy because my grandmother baked biscuits. I think about her because she did do exactly what the Buddha talks about with the bath powder, and that is you take water and you sprinkle on it. You sprinkle the water on the bath powder until you finally knead it into a dough where there is no place within that bath powder that does not um, uh, adhere to the moisture, nor does it ooze. It has got just
Right.
the right amount of water in it, okay? And so this is the way that you think of your first jhana practice, is by taking this dry body, feeling, mind system that we have and start sprinkling it with the water of joy. Every breath becomes joyful. Every thought becomes joyful. That joy first comes from the seclusion. Well, you can say seclusion physically. In fact, we have to think of it that way in the beginning of the practice. But as you go along, that feeling of seclusion or being alone in the world will become much more profound. We, as human beings, are social animals, and we understand. In fact, we can't live now without society. Though I'm here very, very secluded, I'm still completely dependent upon the island's economy.
Right.
And so we do have that, but other than that, basically the life is a secluded life, and we want to get away from the world because we want the world to get away from the mind. And so after we get away from the world, then we get the mind, the world cleared out of the mind. And in this regard, we're talking about the world in the sense of the hindrances, things that keep us from being joyful.
Right.
So that once we're getting into this place, now we begin to very happily watch all of this changing that's happening, the way that consciousness is working, the way that our feelings are working, the way that the mind interacts, the way that we can change the mind state by talking to ourselves about joy. Not only that, but you've had many joyful experiences throughout your life. Just by remembering them brings them back up again. And so we can have pleasant experiences that we use as memory. We can have many different ways of thinking about sprinkling the mindset with joy to bring the mind out of the states that it normally stays in, which is
Yeah.
the state of a dry investigation, into a curiosity kind of thing.
I had remember I was telling you before when the piti arises that, you know, it felt too overwhelming and it felt too dislikable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the last few times now feels more warmer and actually feels more pleasurable. So
Right, see?
yeah, it's gone from a dislike to a like. So there's a difference. There's a difference.
Mm-hmm. And that
But
the difference is this concept of Anapanasati by adding joy.
yeah,
That we can, in fact, feel good. If there's anything that you can learn tonight from me, it is that you can change the mind, and that through the mental changing, you can also change the way you feel.
yeah,
That this is possible.
but that pity that arised, yeah, it just lasts for like 20 or 30 seconds. I stayed on the breath, but I stayed on the breath. It didn't drag me away from the breath, but yet it still went. So I don't know where that was. Maybe I still reacted to it too much, or I investigated it too much, or something. I don't know.
Well, okay, never mind. Start again.
Yeah,
You'll get there. No problem. Okay, so we've taken up through the Anapanasati practice in reference to the Satipatthana. And so I want to leave it there with you tonight so that we can take it up the way that the Satipatthana fits in with the Sambhojana, or the seven factors of enlightenment. But I will leave you with one key word. Go look this word up in the Anapanasati Sutta. The word
right.
is unremitting. Unremitting.
In MN 118,
Hmm.
Anapanasati. Yeah,
Right. Unremitting. And also look it up, the word, look it up in the dictionary.
sure.
All right. So we'll
Yep.
say goodnight to you.
All right. Good night. Take care. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.